Okay, I'd like to welcome everybody to this meeting. We're going to start with the Pledge of Allegiance. What's that? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. To my far left is Administrator Hitt, then Commissioner Huxley, Commissioner Boyce, and John Jesuit. So, Administrator Hitt, you're going to be running this show today, I hear?
I do.
Okay.
I will.
Okay.
Can we have possible agenda additions, Madam Chair?
I looked at the memo of understanding, and it looks like it needs some sort of a vote or something.
Just needs a signature.
But we can't take any action in this meeting, I know. So these
without
signatures, I was
exception.
looking at the dates on all these signatures. They're all over the place.
Yeah, there's
Could it
only about a
wait
third that have
until-
been collected, but we could save a week. It's not mandatory to be done today, but it would be helpful.
Okay, I
So-
think we probably ought to put it to the next meeting where we can actually make a decision.
Just for future reference, we can't ever amend a workshop and have a decision made. I know there's been discussion on
That's
it.
the existing board policy.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, you're on, Administrator Hitt.
Where's Huddle? Is Huddle here? Huddle gonna be here?
I guess so. Jake's here. That's my dog. Just jumped on your lap.
Well, good morning, Madam Chair, Commissioners, members of the public that are here as well, and other Curry County staff members. Appreciate this opportunity to present to you just some basic information, background, some history, some comparisons of our budget with our own past, along with other comparable counties. Want you to feel free to ask questions at any time during the presentation. If you prefer to wait and hold your questions to the end, of course, that's certainly fine by me. Yes,
I'm
ma'am.
just going to ask one question. You talked about comparable counties. Are we talking population?
Yes, and I'll expand on
demographics?
that
Okay.
a little bit more when I get to that point in the presentation.
Okay.
I don't have any recommendations for you today. My presentation is really mostly in the form of, if you will, food for thought or possible action in the future. Some of it would probably even be quite long-term action rather than just in the course of the next few months or even in the remainder of the fiscal year. In all cases, numbers are rounded. So it wasn't my attempt or my desire to indicate exact numbers, just rounding off like $8,357,271. I typically round it up to $8 million, whatever I said, $357,000. So it's not an attempt to worry about exact number crunching.
So it looks like to the nearest 10,000, right?
For
Or
the most part,
1,000 even.
yes, or the nearest 1,000. That's correct.
Okay.
And I'm going to ask Mr. Jesuit to help me here. So are we ready for our first slide? And I should say while he's doing that, I'm not sure exactly how long this presentation will take. I'm committed, obviously, to not, at least for my part, not to go past noon. But we could end up, depending on your questions and so on, and to your own desire to perhaps go a little bit past noon. That'll be up, of course, to the commission to be your choice. No, I should have unlocked that. I apologize, Charles. So what you have here, one of the things I think is often useful. Oh, is that my finger? Oh, that's his finger. Yeah, let's see if we can get that a little bit bigger. I think we can. Yeah, full screen mode there. Okay. One of the things I think is often useful is to kind of look at where we've been with our budget. I should to add as well that my main focus throughout this presentation is on the general fund. It's not on total county resources. partly because total county resources can vary so much depending on if there are large grants, or many of the counties I do comparable with, they maybe have forest timber receipts from county-owned lands, or perhaps federal-owned lands where they happen to get a year or two with exceptionally large receipts. That, in addition to the fact is usually, or almost always, in my experience, the general fund, that's the main problem, main issue to balance. So you can see here just the range of general fund resources from fiscal year 2010-11 to the current fiscal year that we're in. Go ahead, John.
Commissioner Huxley?
Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Huxley.
Do those early on in like 2010 and 11, I'm pretty sure that we still had Curry Community Health and Home Health and Hospice departments in here. Not that they were all general fund, but I think there was significant.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that's included in there, and now you don't have those departments.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Pardon me?
I do not believe they were in general.
Okay, I don't know.
Okay. Go ahead to the next one, John, and I'll address your comments there.
I have one other question before we move on.
Yeah.
On all of those numbers, are any of the SRS, I think that's what they call timber funds, are they included in there?
Yes,
Okay.
it's everything.
Because they said we were going to go back to 2015.
Right, so one of the things, my numbers, well, that would primarily reflect on the last page in your copy there, and you received in your budget packet the proposed general fund for next fiscal year. This does not include any anticipated SRS receipts.
Okay.
So we didn't attempt to quantify that. We will, of course. We did not attempt, at this point, to quantify that.
And one last question, that last one, 7,870,000, was that lower simply because we did not use road funds, or because the SRS fund were not included?
You're talking next year? Yeah, next year is not balanced. I think she's asking about the current year?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
17, 18.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's because in 14, 15, the SRS money was in there. In the 15, 16 budget, included the transfer from road funds.
Got to go back, John. I think you somehow jumped ahead there. Quite a ways ahead, matter of fact.
Boy.
I didn't know you're such a hurry, John.
It's the mouse again.
You went away.
You're going backwards.
Is it lunchtime?
Yeah, I'm hungry.
All right, there we go.
Okay, so the
Thank
16,
you.
17, why is 16, 17 the same dollar amount as 15, 16?
Well, that might have been an error.
I think that might be an error. Because I think 16, 17 is
Oh,
lower.
yeah, so that we corrected that, and I apologize, the correction didn't get in there.
So what should it be? Yeah, I
didn't
thought
have-
that was
did you
weird
bring
that
your
it was the
budget?
I did
same.
not bring my budget.
Okay, I meant to grab it, and I didn't. So.
Anyway, I believe 16, 17
I will correct that.
is lower. And that was because we did not use road funds and just used a little carryover balance. But I'll go get the budget.
Okay.
Thank you. Go ahead, John. So with that caveat in mind about 15, 16, 16, 17, here is, and again, I think both Commissioner Huxley and you, Chairwoman Gold, make good points. I mean, inevitably every year there's a lot of fluctuations in the general fund because there are various funding grants or federal tax timber dollars, whatever it may be, that can vary substantially from year to year. So it's really difficult to say if you compare general fund from one year to next that you're necessarily really comparing apples to apples. Yes, Commissioner.
Yeah.
Yes, Commissioner Huxley.
I agree, and without footnotes or something, it can be very
It could be very
deceiving,
different.
very deceiving.
Right, and I didn't attempt to bore into or drill down, if you will, to that level of detail. I can certainly follow up and do that. I mean, it's just a matter of time commitment on my part. And I might say now that that same statement would be true in looking at other counties and their budgets and their general funds. Again, I didn't bore down, and you'll see in a minute, Tillamook County has this huge general fund. I really didn't bore in to determine why their general fund was so large.
Commissioner Huxley?
Yes, sir.
Again, on that same point too, is that, of course, we've not seen this document until
Right.
5 minutes ago,
Right.
so.
Right.
Well, no, it was
we
there
would've-
earlier. It was there Friday.
Pardon me?
I'm pretty sure it was there Friday.
I was
no,
told it
no,
wasn't even
Commissioner
finished until
Huxley's
this
correct.
morning
Yeah.
when I asked.
Yeah,
So
no,
we have not, so I'm saying is we didn't have time
Right.
to review
For
and
Monday.
ask questions like are coming up
Right, I
now.
understand. And that's why at this point, it's, to me, it's just okay, here's some various things we can take a look at. And then if it's desired to follow up in more detail on any portion of it or on all of it, I'm happy to do that. Regrettably, I did not have time by Friday to finish this graphic report.
It was up there on Monday. I remember reading it, so.
Okay. That's
I
good.
wasn't here
I'm
for
glad to hear
it,
that. All right, so just a bar graph of what we just talked about. Go ahead, John. So here's some basic, excuse me. I should add and seek your permission too, Madam Chair, that when I talk very long, I usually get a frog in my throat or some other kind of speech impairment. So if you are patient with me, I would appreciate that. So what you see here are some basic comparisons with some comparable counties. How did I pick these out? Well, I picked these out with a variety of tests. I looked at population, I looked at geographic area, I looked at tax rate, and I'll talk about that more in just a second, in order to get some counties that I felt were as good a comps. And again, as Mike MacArthur said when he was here our last meeting, the executive officer for the Association of Oregon Counties, when you've seen one Oregon County, you've seen one Oregon County. So again, with a caveat in mind that all of these are different, but I attempted to get as good comps as I reasonably could. Please note, when you look at the tax rates there, Jefferson is an outlier at $3.57, as is Cook County at $3.87. But I will say that they otherwise compare quite well with us. I would like to make just a general budgetary comparison note as well, that if you go on to the websites of two counties I would especially like to call out, for one for commendation and the other for condemnation. And the one I would like to call out for commendation is Cook County. I think if you go on and look at their budget, particularly their budget summary document, it's a beautiful document, easy to read, easy to understand, comprehensive and yet succinct at the same time, at least as far as the bigger budget questions and issues. So I would recommend that to our staff to take a look at and see if we can emulate something similar, if not this fiscal year, at least in the future. The opposite end of the spectrum was Hood River County, whose budget was extremely difficult to wade through, decipher, pick out relevant information. So in addition to the property taxes, tax rate property taxes, and you'll note there the property tax range there from Curry County of roughly $1.7 million to where is it there? Jefferson County at a little over $7.8 million. In addition to that, I put in the major departments or funds or sections of the general fund that I want to talk about today. That is the sheriff, the assessor, the clerk, and the district attorney. I'm not trying to just pick on those four or say that that other departments aren't equally important. The reason I picked those four departments was obviously particularly the sheriff is the largest user of the general fund, and the other three are, it was easier to do comparables with other county. Assessment is pretty much done, this assessment operations are done very similarly around the state. Likewise with DA functions, and to a lesser degree perhaps, but still mostly true with the clerk. Go ahead, John. So here's a bar chart. You can see in the green, or I don't know what shade of green you exactly call that, but at any rate, that's the general fund collections, revenues from these various counties. You'll see that the two lowest are Hood River and our county, Curry County. The highest, obviously, is Tillamook. Again, why Tillamook is so much higher than the others, I'm not sure. I didn't take the time to drill down to look at that, other than I did notice that they had an exceptionally large reserve fund carry forward. In addition to that, you'll note the sheriff portion of the general fund is down there in kind of a purple color. And in every county's case, not surprisingly, the sheriff is the largest user of the general fund, ranging from Jefferson at the highest to Hood River, Union, and our county as some of the lowest. And you can see the range there. Go ahead, Joe. So I also took a look at salaries. So how about salary comparisons? For this purpose, I added in Coos and Josephine counties because they are definitely competitors with us, and far more so than probably the other ones are as far as hiring. I didn't include Josephine or Coos County and the other comparables because they're simply so much bigger. But you'll note there the various ranges, deputy DA, for example, ranges, and sheriff deputy ranges, along with the average, and that's just not the average of the actual people on the payroll, but just a mathematical average of the minimum salary and the maximum salary. On the far right there, you'll see the average amount for deputy DA. The average of our comparable counties, and including our two neighbors, is $55.69. And for the sheriff, deputy average, $4,269. You'll see, now that's not counting Curry County average, or Curry County counted in there. That's the average of everybody else. So our deputy DA average is $46.50, again, compared with the $55.69 amount. So big gap there. Small gap compared to the average with our comparables. For the sheriff, $41.79 versus $42.69. Yeah, go ahead, John. Here it is graphed out for the deputy DA. Curry, obviously, on the left, the average amount on the right. You see the range there from Hood River being the highest, highest compensation for deputy DAs, and Curry County being the lowest. Okay. Here's the sheriff deputy average on the same type of graph. Curry, you see there, Curry, Coos, Jefferson, and Tillamook are all pretty close there. Looks like Tillamook is slightly the lowest, and Crook County definitely the highest. With the average amount on the far right.
Commissioner Boyce?
Just one
Yes,
quick.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Just want to go back for a second. By the way, all those counties are really close to our population, as you mentioned. That was, I mean, a couple of them within 100. Anyway, you said Tillamook County had quite a reserve. Do you remember how much? And is that's not a road fund reserve? I assume.
No, that wasn't a road fund. That was a general fund reserve. If I remember correctly, and I was scanning through their numbers, something like 6 or 7 million. I could be wrong on that, but I can certainly get back with you and confirm that number.
That's fine. Thanks.
Go ahead, John. So here's the assessor department through history. The assessor from 2011 at $640,000 total department budget. In 2018, $692,000. So a 7-year range there. I also looked at each department of these 4 key departments. Also looked at how much general fund support they used in those respective years. And you'll see there, in the assessor's case, it ranged from 2011, $460,000 to this year, $507,000. Go ahead. Here's the graph of that. The blue being the total department budget over those from 2011 to 2018. The red being the amount of general fund support. As you can see, in the assessor's case, the general fund support hasn't changed a whole lot over that period of time. You know, a little bit of bounce up there in 2013, a little bounce down in 2014, but otherwise a relatively flat general fund support for the assessor function. And of course, that includes the tax assessment portion of that as well. Go ahead. Here's our district attorney. Again, same period of time. Started out at $312,000, is now at $382,000 total budget. General fund support went from $242 to $352. So go ahead. Show the graph on that one. Same type of graph. Blue being the total budget per year. And
So I just have one question there. I'm going back to the last one. It looks like in 2015, there was a significantly lower amount there. Do you know why, or?
Yeah, it is. Everett's here. Everett's not here. I don't know if John. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they had a grant to kind of
Yeah.
cover the difference. Okay, Commissioner Huxley?
But if when you speak, you
Yeah,
have to
right.
come up,
Yeah,
or we're
that-
not going to
could
hear
you repeat
anything
that?
on the,
Yeah,
on
we
the
always have
video.
to keep in mind we have to be at the mics.
I believe in the district attorney's case, I believe that at the time, I'm trying to remove them, but at the time, I think there were some grants that made their budget go up and down a little bit over the years. So I'm trying to get all the grants actually into a grant fund so that they don't affect their regular budget so much.
So let me just ask one little question here. We're talking total budget, and then we're talking general fund support. And even the general fund support was significantly lower, but their total budget was also significantly lower. So,
Yeah, I'd have to drill down on that years.
I would have
we
to.
can, we can
it's not the
yeah.
end of the world,
Right.
but
Yeah, you know, it's a possibility that maybe if they did get a grant.
Is
it might
this
have-
the district attorney one we're talking
Yeah,
about?
district
Yeah.
attorney. Yes.
but wouldn't that grant be part of their total budget?
Well, you would think normally it would be, but.
I
unless
just
there's
not,
some
I'm
kind
not
of-
seeing it on this.
She's looking at the difference between 2014 and 2015.
You just look at 2015, and
Yeah.
it's significantly
Different
lower than
than
all of the
everybody
others.
else. Yeah,
Yeah.
significantly lower.
And, you know, I actually would have to go look at his actuals. Is this actuals or budget? You're using budget numbers or actual numbers?
Actual for that year, actual.
Yeah, I'd have to,
Might be the year.
I
he
would
took
have to
over.
go look at that. I just don't know
Okay.
off the top of my head.
I just noticed that when
Yeah,
I was
no,
looking
it is
through the
very
numbers.
It's kind of hard when you're,
Yeah.
I wasn't here in 2015 or probably would
Well,
remember why
I got
it
you, neither was
happened.
I.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
It just kind of jumped out at me.
Yeah, I'll ask John Jesuit to take a note of all these questions, and I'll definitely get back, if not at a meeting, certainly in person or via email
Okay.
directly to you. Go ahead, John. So that's the district attorney. Here's the sheriff over the same period of time.
God damn it, sorry.
Okay. Started out in 2011 at 2,930,000. 2018, current year, 3,870. General fund support, those changed substantially from 2.3 million or 2.3.5 million to current year 3.4 million. So you can go ahead and switch that one, John. So there's the bar graph, and you see it probably pretty well on the bar graph, the red being the total general fund support. Again, a fair bit of fluctuation there, probably because of grants or other activity going on.
So could that have been due to we didn't use any road funds that year?
Road funds could very well be part of this. Yeah,
Yeah.
that I'm not sure of.
Because there was a significant amount that was not
Right, right.
road funds.
You'll notice this year, 2018, the sheriff's budget is very heavily, you know, a very high percentage of the sheriff's total budget is dependent on the general fund.
Yeah, but 2017, notice the general fund significantly
Yes,
lower,
Yes,
and I think that's due to the
probably
road
road,
fund.
road
Yeah.
funds. Okay, thank you for that. Have to turn on your thing. Well, I don't know, maybe that's not gonna work. Yeah, yeah, well, it was pretty, we couldn't really do that. Go ahead, John.
As long
So
as it's on pitch, we're okay.
Here's a summary of all that. Sheriff from 2011, 2018. Sheriff General Fund support, same thing with assessor, district attorney. Here I added in the clerk, and overall. So you'll notice here the key, in my view, takeaway on this slide is the right-hand side where you got the total change and the percent change. So sheriff up $940,000, 32%, but his general fund support up 44.7, at least comparison to this year. Now, obviously, again, certain apples to oranges comparison depending on which year you pick, but I thought it was fair and reasonable to compare it to this year. Assessor, quite a different story. He's up only 8.1%, and his general fund support up only 8.7. So hasn't really outpaced in any way or increased in any way as a percent his general fund support. So very good, Mr. Assessor. That's excellent. District attorney, I can't give him quite as high a grade, being facetious, joking. He's up a total of $70,000 in his budget, or 22.4%, but his general fund support up 110, or 45.5 support. Clerk, wow, look at that, 212, no change in the general fund support. Total budget up only 9.5. There's the overall total of those four funds, up almost $1.1 million on the bottom right of your screen there, or on your paper, for a total of 26%. But general fund support for those funds taken together is up 43%. And just for a point of comparison, the Consumer Price Index.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing to put in there.
17.8 for that same period of time. Go to the bar chart, the next one, John. So the bar chart there is, again, key. I think one of the key things we see going on here, long-term trend, is more and more reliance on the general fund, on average. Again, a lot of fluctuation from year to year, depending on grants, use of road funds, et cetera. But the overall trend, particularly in the last couple of years, or last year especially, this year, is to rely on more general fund support.
And that's a direct correlation to how much revenues we can get outside for those departments outside of those departments don't have a lot of revenue sources. So the general fund support continues to go up.
So maybe we need to set up corners on the street corners with pencils, or
It's just the general fund supporting is because those are departments in particular do not have resources against their expenditures. They don't have their own fees and collections like other departments have.
we can always change that.
Yeah. Go ahead, John. So one of the things, and I'm just going to kind of skim over this, again, excuse me, is, and I'll talk about a little bit more in my conclusion, but service level measures for one, for example, is what's called the index crime rate, index crime rates. I don't have good numbers really because of not full reporting after 2012, or after 2013. But you'll kind of see there the total index crimes from the various counties, how it changed from 2008 through 2012. And again, that's just an example of a way to measure how well are we doing. We can take a look at that index crime rate and say, is it going up? Is it going down? How does it compare with other counties? How does it compare with the state as a whole?
So how do they figure that?
Well, I'll get to that in just a sec. Okay. So here it is, bar chart by year and county. You'll see Josephine County substantially higher over the entire measured period, but especially in 2008, 2012, a higher crime index, and then Coos County behind it. You see the other counties that are more our size, with the semi-exception of Union, and maybe Tillamook, are all pretty close to the same there as index crime rate. Let me define that just for a minute in accordance with your question there, Madam Chair. Index crime rate is Index crimes were established by the FBI a good many years ago, and I didn't bring a list of it, but includes things like rape, murder, burglary, felonious assault. And maybe the sheriff knows it off the top of his head, but anyway, there's 6 of those, what are called serious or substantial crimes. Doesn't include things like drug possession or drug trafficking. It doesn't include fraud or what's typically considered white collar crime or that type of thing. But it is a common comparison that's used to see kind of, if you will, a performance measure. How are we doing? Now, in my own personal experience, I had 2 history points when I started out in government. Back in the early 80s, we took a look at, this is Doherty, California, city, interestingly enough, population-wise, about the same size as Curry County is now, about 25,000. And we took a look at our index crime rate. Of course, there in LA County, you've got lots of comparable cities right nearby, and our index crime rate compared to our comparables didn't look very good. So we were what's called a contract city. The LA County Sheriff, we didn't have our own police department. LA County Sheriff provided all of our police, public safety functions for the city. So what we did, fortunately we had the money to do this, what we did is significantly enhance or increase the police presence, got the sheriff to assign a full-time detective for the city alone, more patrols for the city alone, and a variety of other support functions, so that we were able to see that index crime rate over the course of the next 3-4 years drop substantially. We did something similar when I came to Lebanon in the year 2000. We had an index crime rate at that time in excess of most other cities. I would say almost all other cities, with the exception of Portland and Salem, I think, as I recall, in the Willamette Valley. So we did something similar, significantly increased our police presence, patrols, etc. Ended up building a jail, municipal jail, obviously very small, but still an important step for holding prisoners for an extended period of time until they came to trial. Madam Chair.
Okay, when I'm looking at these numbers, is this raw data rather than a rate? Usually when I think of a rate, I think of a percent.
Well, it's called the crime index. So what they do is they take the total number of index crimes, okay, that are committed over the course of a year. They usually use a calendar year, and then they divide that by the population, and they multiply it times I forget now whether it's 100 or 1,000. So it's basically amount of crimes per capita, basically, of the index type crimes. It's amount of those crimes per capita.
Okay, that makes more sense.
Yeah.
Are 2 of those? Are 2 of those our immediate neighbors?
Yes, 2 of those are immediate neighbors. Yes. Go ahead, John. Here's another way. You see the index crime rate there, also numerically drawn out. I didn't put Josephine on there, but I just did a few of the counties. As of 2013, which is the last time I have, believe it or not, full statistics from all reporting agencies in Curry County. We don't quite have a full 2014, 15, 16, we don't at all, and I'm not sure about 17, but the 17 report isn't out yet. But at any rate, and then then you can compare that also with arrest efficiency. So
what does that mean?
Well, what that means is the total number of index crimes. So let's say you have 500 index crimes over the course of a year, and if you make 50 arrests, your arrest efficiency is 10%. You only found potential bad guys for 1/10, 10% of the crimes, index crimes that were committed over the course of the year. So you see, at least the most recent year I have this, Curry County Sheriff, very efficient, 37.5, closely followed by Jefferson County with Coos kind of the lowest there. So, and also, which kind of goes with a higher index crime rate. Obviously, the more crimes you're having to deal with, it becomes harder and harder to, kind of chase all those crimes and perpetrators of those crimes down. So it's kind of not surprising that their arrest efficiency is lower. But nevertheless, I think that's a valid, comparable performance level, performance service level standard that could be tracked and perhaps given some significance. Go ahead, John. So, conclusion, matters to consider. One of the things, of course, is funding the sheriff to the extent that he can provide a 24/7 patrol. And I'm not sure, Sheriff, do you know when the last time you had 24/7?
It's been probably 15 years.
Oh, 15 years, okay. So, so that's one of the standards that are typically used, a goal, if you want to say it, for most law enforcement agencies to have enough staff, certified staff, deputies or officers on the department payroll, if you will, in order to have 24/7 coverage. Now, that is at least one officer on duty 24/7. And I think that's an important standard to try and reach. Now, obviously, we haven't reached it in 15 years. I wish I had a little more recent numbers as far as crime rate, how the crime rate's been impacted by that, other than 2013. At least, as you saw, at least up through 2013, we weren't doing too badly, despite having less than a 24/7 patrol. So one of the things we could do, and I would recommend that we do, is staff follow up with trying to get more current numbers regarding that. Then go ahead, next one. Another potential to consider is assessor's pilot program to reduce the assessment cycle. The assessor has one key service level that we could take a look at, and that's his reassessment cycle, which currently, Jim, runs 16 years. Yeah. And the state recommends 6 or 7?
It used to be a state mandated 6-year
Oh, okay.
cycle. But
Okay.
that mandate is no longer there. But we'd like to get it down to 6 to 8 years.
Right. So that would be, and the assessor is currently pursuing a program, a pilot program, to consider doing a more frequent assessment cycle. And that program would potentially be funded by state of Oregon along with the cities and the taxing districts, as well as us putting in some money into that. The estimated fee for us, $125,000, roughly.
Total cost $125,000, about $10,000.
Oh, okay. So only 8 to 10,000 part of ours.
Jim, could you come up to the
Oh,
microphone
yeah, Jim needs
so
to
we
come
can
up. Yep.
hear that? Because
Yep.
that's kind of important stuff.
Yeah, this is good stuff. Thank you, Assessor.
Yeah, we're talking total cost of the potential pilot program. You might recall last year at the budget session, I brought you some information that showed because we were out of cycle, we were missing a lot of property values out there. I put that same program together, if you will, and we've been talking to AOC, LOC, Small Districts Association, School Boards Association, and they're generally willing to assist to get Curry County up to a level with this pilot program. $125,000 would hire and equip 1.5 extra employees in the assessor's office, and I think over 5 or 6 year period, we could get our reappraisal cycle down to 6 to 8 years.
So when you say 125,000, you're talking total from everybody or just from the county?
Total from everybody.
Okay,
The
so
split on that is based on the total amount of taxes that each district gets out of the tax pie that we have for Curry County.
so the schools would be paying the majority of that.
It would actually be the state paying for the schools about 60% of the total cost.
Okay, I just have one question on that because I approached our superintendent with this same thing, and this is Brookings' superintendent of schools. And he said if they were to get more tax money, what happens is the state gives them less because each school district has a certain amount that they get per student. And so if they get more tax dollars from the county, it's really not to their advantage to get more tax dollars because the state puts in anyway.
Generally that.
Which is why what they're looking at is having the state kick in the contribution for the schools, because the biggest benefactor then, because of what you just said, is the state.
Right. It would be to the state's advantage to do this, not the school districts.
That's correct.
Okay. I just thought I'd bring that out because I was concerned about it, and when that was explained, it's kind of like, why should the schools even bother? Because it's not going to be to their benefit.
It will be to the state's benefit, though. You understand
Yeah,
that part?
I understand
And our
that part,
benefit,
definitely.
yeah. And our benefit. The assessor's office did a preliminary kind of dry run on this with the city of Gold Beach, local option, and the Gold Beach urban renewal all told together. And they raised with reassessments, and Assessor Colin has a lot of pictures of places that were discovered and or yet to be actually put on the rolls, places that we either expanded or built totally without a building permit and so on. So at any rate, the amount raised was almost $6,000 for the city of Gold Beach at a cost of, is that correct? Or am I reading this wrong?
Well,
I'll let you read it.
Okay, so we've been reappraising in the city of Gold Beach over the last couple of years, and what we found was we found about 2.2 million in unpermitted property values, and which would raise for just the district that is the city of Gold Beach approximately $6,000 in additional property taxes. If this pilot project moves forward with the state's contribution at 60%, the city of Gold Beach's cost for that would be about $3,000. So basically, we've already found twice
Well, and
what
that's
it
just
would
for
cost
1
them.
year. What happens is they're going to get those taxes.
That's correct.
Yeah.
I would say in
But
perpetuity, but not
this
necessarily.
pilot project would be looking for a continuous contribution from the cities and other districts, as well as the state.
And the state's all for this?
This went before the legislative session and the short session, and we're just begun work on this in, say, November, and it took some time. And so it didn't get to the legislative session in a timely fashion. They haven't done that, but there are people that are looking for to take this forward to the E-Board this year and still get a $75,000 contribution towards this from the E-Board. That means something to people that go to the legislature. I'm not really sure what the E-Board is.
Emergency board. Yeah.
Okay. But they're looking to get that contribution for this next year for 18-19.
So question, how do other counties compare to us as far as their assessment cycle?
There are several counties around the state that have 20-year reappraisal cycles. One that I would give you an example of, Deschutes County. He says he's on a 20-year reappraisal cycle. However, they have a very good code enforcement officer that are actually finding the places that are being built without building permits, and so they're not getting behind on those. Because that's their discovery. Their code enforcement officer is finding those places, notifying the assessor, and they're getting those taken care
Well,
of.
and let's hope that we can do the same with getting a code enforcement officer, not just going out and checking on raw sewage, et cetera.
And it goes back to what I told you at the budget process last year. Our discovery process is either the building permit process or the reappraisal cycle. We don't have a code enforcement officer that's informing us of anything, so.
Would you like one?
You know, I think if you get a code enforcement officer, they're gonna have their hands full just catching up to all those properties. We've already found that were built without building permits. So I would be surprised to see them get ahead of us.
Well, if they were built without building permits, you've got the permit funds that are going to come in. Plus, you're going to have the assessments change, I would assume.
Permit funds don't do anything for the assessor's office.
No, they
currently.
don't. But the assessed value, I would assume, would go up if they had.
Yeah, once we go there and do the reappraisals on those properties, yes.
Right.
And like you said, once we get that on the roll, it stays on the roll. Normally increases by 3% per year, and in perpetuity, the word that you didn't want to use, I think you said.
Well, some people end up trashing their places, so,
Yeah.
It's true, too.
so I can't say that totally.
So anyway, these figures were just for the city of Gold Beach.
Okay.
And I would say that we've not completed the city of Gold Beach. We've done about 80% of the residential properties in the city of Gold Beach. We have not done any commercial or industrial or utility properties.
Well, you know, if the state's willing to pay, what was it, 70%?
60.
60? Then I think it's a no-brainer. Let's go for it.
And our estimates are that, I mean, I told you that the return so far for the city of Gold Beach is about 2 to 1, but I would estimate that the returns countywide for the districts would be closer, anywhere from 3 to 5 to 1.
Okay. So let's get on her.
All right, thank you, Jim. Go ahead. Yeah, so in the county clerk's office, another issue to consider is the need for a new voter tally system. Obviously, we have at least two elections for this year. The current software that they use is no longer being supported. It's on a Windows 7 platform versus a Windows 10 platform. So the clerk is looking at a new voter tally system at approximate cost, fairly substantial. If we were to pay it all up front, $50,000 to $60,000, although she doesn't have a final bid on that yet. She's expecting it any day. However, it could be financed over a period of at least 5 years, you know, at a rough cost of $8,000, $10,000, maybe at most $12,000 a year, including interest.
Could that save us in time for people having to tally them by hand?
Yes, it's a big saver in time. I'm not sure we could necessarily equate it to direct staffing reductions, but we certainly could equate it to a reduction in bad counts or challenge counts. This is a system that tracks every single ballot that's submitted, kind of categorizes it, kind of presents it back to the election officials in a condensed, easy to see and understand form, particularly relating to undercounts, overcounts, damaged ballots, etc. So that really enhances and speeds that process, and our understanding is makes that process as well more accurate.
So does Renee Colin have to hire extra people at each election to do the counting, or?
We typically bring on part-time help to help with the counting, so it probably would reduce some of that, and maybe virtually all of it. I'm not sure about that, but would certainly assist with hiring part-time help during the actual election. You know,
Okay, I'm just thinking in terms of how to pay for this.
Oh, absolutely. Go ahead, John. Payer benefit changes. Obviously, this is always a difficult area. You saw, at least in comparing, particularly the deputy district attorney, and I know the district attorneys reported to me, you saw how much out of whack his salaries were with our comparable counties as well as our two neighboring counties. I know he's very challenged to recruit for positions. He lost one of his key deputy district attorneys just a week or two ago, and he's having difficulty finding applicants, qualified applicants. I think in no small measure, I'm not saying exclusively, but no small measure, that's probably due to his substantially below average pay scale. And I know the sheriff reports similar problems. He hires deputies, he gets them certified, he gets them trained, and then as often as not, they go away to another county that simply offers more pay and benefits. So one of the things that needs to be looked at, I understand the year-to-year budgetary crunch, if you will, particularly general fund budget crunch. The tendency is to, you know, well, we just can't afford any raises this year. And I understand the truth of that statement, but as that statement keeps being repeated year after year after year, you gradually run into a situation where we are no longer competitive in hiring. But we want to keep our wages, you know, at a reasonable level. We also want wages and benefits that will allow us to attract qualified people. So I'm not saying we're there yet in the sense of not being able to attract qualified people, but I am saying we are in the area where we're, you know, under pressure with that problem. Go ahead, John. 5-year technology update plan. I understand this was presented from Coos Curry Electric, Curry County, Oregon Information Technology 5-year plan. And I'm not knowledgeable enough about what's in this plan to say this is a good plan or not so good plan. But I do know that we have to be budgeting and providing for enhancements, improvements, replacements of computers and other support equipment as well as software. So what I would like to see happen is we put in our budget every year enough money, if not to implement this plan, at least something that will get us down the road.
Commissioner Huxley?
I would hope that we'd hear some comments from county council on that, because he was involved with the IT department before you started.
Right.
And there was quite a detailed plan.
Right, and I assume this is what I was given as the plan.
County council?
Go ahead, John.
Sure. This was actually examined in pretty good detail by our budget department, I think, at the last budget round, and I know I was involved in the creation of it. I think, you know, I don't want to put her on the spot, but Louise knows a lot about this. And then I think what happened is, I mean, just a summary is that Dan Springer came and presented this, and it was a fairly, you know, ambitious or robust or complete plan. And then the budget committee basically said we can't afford it, and they basically cut, you know, in other words, if he said we want to replace 11 terminals a year, they said we'll do 5 or something. I mean, Louise, I'm paraphrasing there. Do you have any independent recollection of how that went? And I know we have Commissioner Huxley, you were on the budget committee, but to think that I have any insight into this document beyond John Hitt or Louise here, the real person with the insight is, I think, Dan Springer. So,
I believe what we did was when we went through the, this is the 5-year plan, but there was also another document that had a 5-year budgetary plan. This doesn't seem to be in here.
Yeah, I wasn't given that.
Yeah, so what we did was we did the absolutely minimum we had to do to keep that 5-year plan for next year's, this current year's plan. And so we did not budget to replace any equipment. It was replacing the software that had to be done and finishing the stuff that had to be done about that.
we're talking about the firewall and
Firewalls
and got it.
stuff like
All right,
that.
sure.
So
Spam filter.
they went through
yeah.
that
Okay.
and they said, this is essential,
Mm-hmm.
and that's the things the budget committee kept.
Okay.
And the ones that weren't essential, like replacing individual desktop computers and updating that stuff, was not kept.
So again, Commissioner Huxley, if you had other follow-up for me, I'll try, but I just don't want to have anyone think that I've got really a ton of insight on this.
Commissioner
Well,
Huffman?
my point
Yeah.
was, I was involved with
Yep.
you also in those discussions.
Sure.
And at part of them also, Louise Kallstrom was, and there was significant thought and detail that went into that. And it was, you know, for really the first time we had a 5-year plan. Yeah, you can make decisions when you look at it, and we did, but even on the firewall and some of the backup systems, we're talking that were done were many tens of thousands of dollars in that. So, and following that
And that's-
recommendation.
yeah,
So
we
I just
figured
don't
we did the
want
ones that were
people to
most
think
important.
that, you know, that even though there was, but we really didn't follow it because we didn't have
Oh.
the money. That's
Yeah.
absolutely not the case.
No, we did what we had to, we looked at what was the most important to get done at that time. And so we kept those in the budget to continue to get those updated first. And then, of course, we will be looking at another 5-year plan again as we budget for IT this time, also to see where we are, what needs to be done.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification, Louise and Commissioner Huxley. Appreciate that. So I guess part of the question would be, do we want to plan budgetarily for just the absolute minimum necessary? One of the issues too that came up, and unfortunately we got a pretty good grade, CIS, our insurance provider, liability insurance provider, does occasionally, I'm not sure how often, but come down and audit our technology, particularly as far as malware and other threats and firewall issues. And I know while they gave us a good grade, there was one in particular, and I don't recall exactly what it was, but one particular pretty expensive piece of software they strongly recommended. But just as an example of what needs to be done there, may be wise to do more than just the absolute bare bones minimum, at least plan to do that on an every year basis. Go ahead, John. Long-term capital improvement plan. Basically, that is a protracted process. I do have here a 3-year facilities plan, which I would call really more a maintenance plan from Mr. Hansen. I don't know if, I'm not aware of, not seen any other documentation on file. What I would like to propose to you, and again, this would be probably take at least a year to put together, is a long-term capital improvement plan, which usually go out 20 years. Planning for what do we need to do, do we need to replace? Well, for example, I know one of the things the sheriff is concerned about is a major jail update and overhaul. Obviously, very expensive project. So we need, for example, to plan for improvements, upgrades, enlargements. What do we need to, for the old courthouse? Do we need to think about this building? Do we need to think about replacing the roof at some point, 5 years from now, 10 years from now? Do we need to consider perhaps include in there maybe construction of a new park somewhere? These are all parts of the components that make up a long-term capital facilities plan. Obviously, that takes a lot of discussion amongst the elected officials, such as yourselves, as well as usually a consulting civil engineer, who then can sit down and plan out what your priorities might be, recommendations, first of all, of what he sees or she sees as the needs, the compelling needs, and then whatever else the county commissioners may decide should be considered in addition to the compelling needs. For example, to replace a potentially failing roof in 5 years. But in addition to that, then develop a plan of how you would implement this capital facilities plan. What would you do in year 1? What would you do year 5, year 13, and so on out 20 years? Now, this is something that requires an update, preferably every year, but probably certainly at least every other year. But would include setting money aside in the budget every year to implement, because if you have a capital facilities plan, and so you know how much you're planning on spending every year to implement the plan, if you've approved the plan, and you say, this is what we want to do, then you've also approved setting aside the necessary funding each year to implement the plan. Now, obviously, there may be situations come up in the course of that 20-year plan, sooner or later, where you can't go ahead and do the plan that year because of other urgent needs or revenues came in substantially lower than expected, whatever it may be. Yes, Madam Chair.
Should we also be considering having some sort of a depreciation on?
Yes, that's part of the plan, absolutely.
Okay,
yes.
good.
Yep. Go ahead, John. Service levels and service priorities. So I gave you some examples when talking about particularly the sheriff's office. But we could do that across the board for all departments. How do we measure up? What minimum level of service do you as commissioners want to establish? For example, what's kind of your pain of threshold or your goal for an index crime rate, for example? What goal would you like to set for the turnaround? Taking a department I haven't discussed today, planning and community development. What should be a reasonable service level or preferred service level for turnaround of residential building plans that are turned in? So I know Carolyn Johnson has told me right now we're doing that about 2 weeks. Are you satisfied with that? I know there are places that do it in 2 days or less. I know there are places that take 2 months or more. So all of those are part of the discussions that we would have to take a look at. In addition, as we look at the general fund, which obviously is the one under most stress, who gets more of that general fund? Who gets less of that general fund if it can't meet the need, which it doesn't right now, and why? Why should one department get more? Why should one department get less? Now, I know the quick and simple answer is, well, we need to cut the people that are in the general fund by 10% in order to balance the budget. And that's certainly, that's certainly doable. That certainly can be done. And it's a simple way that does have that, and it kind of shares the pain. But I guess it begs the question, should we really share the pain? Are there certain functions, activities, departments that maybe even should get an increase while we see other departments take a decrease? All questions that are none of those are easy to answer, but I think questions, and again, we can't answer these questions all by June 30th. I'm not implying that, but over the course of the next year, maybe 2 years, that we could be working on those.
Maybe that's a good reason for zero-based budgeting.
Well, that's another way of addressing it. Absolutely. Good point. Go ahead, John. So another option is major service, kind of the opposite of setting or increasing service levels and establishing service priorities, related to establishing priorities, would be perhaps major service reductions or eliminations. Now, I'm going to give you a couple examples, and again, I remind you, as I said at the beginning, these are not recommendations, I don't mean to say that these are viable ways to go. I'm just saying this could be something that would be put on the plate rather than giving everybody a 5 or 10% reduction across the board. You might want to consider shutting down certain activities or functions, or at least reducing them to the absolute bare bones minimum that may be required by state law or just by your own judgment. For example, if we were to close down juvenile parole and probation, except for the state required mandated minimum, we'd save about $225,000. We could tell the assessor, well, you got a 16-year cycle, other counties are at 20, let it slide to 20, no problem. Maybe even let it go to 25. Another way would be to tell all employees, with the exception of the sheriff's department, we're putting you on a 32-hour work week. We're only going to be open those days for 4 days a week, and nobody works, barring exceptional circumstances, nobody works for 8 hours a week, again, other than the sheriff's department. And a few pretty drastic step, absolutely, but you would save about $1 million roughly in pay and benefits. So again, none of these are easily resolved. All of these take a lot of thought, a lot of consideration, a lot of research before decisions are made. But I'm here primarily just, again, to start the process of thinking, food for thought, and you guys not obviously today, but deciding which one of these pathways, if any, do you really want to explore? Go ahead, John. Or we can explore other funding sources. We've all heard and been around on the ballot many times now, and I understand in the past the tax versus no tax. You know, do we not increase taxes? You've seen we're the lowest property tax county in the state by a substantial margin. We were slightly above, minimally slightly above Josephine County, but last fall they passed a jail levy and they renewed a dog control levy. So they're now at $7 per thousand. Well, we're still at 60. And pretty much everybody, other with the exception of Coos County, which is right about the same amount as Josephine, pretty much they go up very rapidly after that. So that's a question. Do we want to consider sponsoring at some point another local tax option? Another option that I saw, and again, I didn't really drill down into this, but most of the comparable counties I looked at operated a justice court. And I know why they're doing that, because they're all reaping more money, more revenues, fine and and other revenues, related revenues, via the justice court route than they're getting through the circuit court. We could adopt a much more aggressive grant writing policy, pursuing grants more aggressively, maybe hire or contract with skilled government grant writers. They're out there. And we could be looking, I know our entire staff looks aggressively for grants, but I am also confident that if we were to contract with somebody that spends their entire day, every day, doing nothing but researching and writing grants, we could probably find some more and/or gain grants that maybe we're not winning out on today. Of course, that has its own downside, because grants, you know, there's a lot of accountability. There's a lot of hoops we as a staff, you as the county commissioners would have to jump through, and usually those grants come with a lot of strings attached. So there's a bit of a downside there. Another option would be steep fee increases. So we could look more aggressively and across the board at what fees we charge and develop an aggressive fee increase raising schedule over the course of the next, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, however amount we want to go out. We could take on some debt, and I suggested taking on perhaps, and again, not my recommendation, but an option, for example, for the clerk's new vote count computer software, rather than trying to fund it cash out of the general fund, borrow, the contractor has a funding agency they work with, and so we could take on some debt there. We could issue some revenue bonds or general obligation bonds. Again, I'm not making any of those recommendations, but that is an option we could do. Another thing that we could take a look at is combining organizations. We have a lot of different organizations. For example, we have 4 different police departments in Curry County. Relatively small county, population 23, a little bit spread out, I understand that. But it might be a lot more efficient for us to contemplate and work with the 3 other cities to perhaps a joint police force. And I'll give you one very successful example that I already touched on, and that is not really, I realize you're very much as far as the 2 areas, apples and oranges in the extreme comparison, but Los Angeles County Sheriff acts as the police force for many, many of the smaller LA County standards, smaller than probably 75,000 or so cities in Los Angeles County. Very effectively, very efficiently, that sheriff is able to provide a level of training for his and equipping his deputies in excess of what typically a local police department could do. Now again, that's a very long-term solution, and we need a lot of people sitting at the table, a lot of people nodding their heads yes, and I never get there, but that is something that could be looked at over a period of time. A lot of things to think about here. Again, I didn't don't give this presentation with making any particular recommendations. I will follow up with the questions you've asked regarding more detailed information, and if you have either more questions now or later, I'll be happy to follow up with those as well. I do, however, want to address and have Louise Kallstrom address one of the things I provided you was this spreadsheet, 2819 General Fund. Excuse me, get a drink. This is very preliminary, and again, we don't want to, probably not prepared to dwell on details. I will tell you it does include enough additional deputies for the sheriff to do 24/7 patrol. It does not include the money that the assessor would like to do his pilot program. It doesn't include the money for the clerk's new computer software system, vote counting system. And it does include a few other things that are footnoted here, but I'll let Louise Kallstrom address those.
Okay, so on this, the first box, it says 1819 total revenue, payroll expenditures, materials and services, other total expenditures, and then it has the two from the general fund.
For the screen.
Those are projections right now for for the 18-19 budget. The revenues are basically the same as the year before, except for I did update a few things in non-departmental, in that I projected carryover, and it certainly isn't going to be what we budgeted for last year, so our budget for carryover for next year is going to have to be a lot lower. And then
Would you repeat that? I'm not sure I'm making my notes to exactly what you said. Could you start when you were commenting about what was actual anticipated or projected revenue? And maybe also if we could get it up on the screen. That's
I'm waiting for him to put it up on the screen.
Suggesting.
Look at that. So first, let's try to get it so we could just see that first box better.
But you have the electronic version. You put that up.
Is there?
From a flash drive? I assume there is. Oh, yeah, I'm sure there's a.
You had it, just turn.
Oh, I'm looking at this screen. It's up there?
Just turn the light on.
And then a light.
Do we have one of those laser printers so you could maybe point where everything is?
And it doesn't work on the screen.
Oh, doesn't it?
It doesn't, you don't see it. I brought one in, it doesn't work.
Oh.
You don't need to turn that.
Jeez, even with my new eye, I can't see all of it.
May I make a suggestion too? You get the full packet electronically. You just pull the full packet up and put that electronic document. Yeah, I'm looking at no. But it's in the packet.
Yeah, it was part of the agenda pack, was it? This, I think I would say that.
Yeah.
Did you get it?
Yeah, it's part of it.
It is, and it'd be a lot clearer than that.
I don't know if you guys want to do that. I don't know where it is. Is it on this laptop here?
Yeah, you access the county website and pull it right up through the meeting agenda packet on meeting and minutes.
Okay.
Just scroll to that page.
I don't know how to get this back, JJ, to where it was.
I'll press escape. I think that's fine.
Oh, good.
We also think, oh, good, you're gonna find the packet.
Yeah.
You tell me
Yeah.
when it's in the board meeting?
Yeah, it would be on the board meeting for 3/28/18 as far as the packet.
Workshop.
What page?
Well, it's just, it would be referred to as a full packet.
There you go.
And
I pushed some buttons, I'm sorry.
You had it
My
there.
fingerprints are all over that thing, yeah.
Oh, I don't like that mouse.
I don't either, that's why I moved into it.
I'd like you to have that, JJ.
Oh, it flashed. There we
Ah,
go.
there we go.
There you go, thank you.
Thanks, Rose.
Okay, so.
Maybe JJ can just point with the little mouse where you are.
Well, let's go to that first column in the first box that says total revenue. So
Okay.
those revenues are basically the 17-18 revenues with a couple of exceptions, one of which is noted on number 4 footnote below and the number 9 footnote below. So the number 4 footnote is that next year, it could change with this new bill that was just signed, although I'm not sure what it actually says, but it was rewritten for Title III to allow more expenditures of Title III, but I think it's still going to be restricted to search and rescue type things, and this project of the GIS operations, which that if you go back up so you could see number 4, GIS operations has some Title III revenue into it, and that has been used up and will no longer be available from the old projects for the Title III projects. I think even with the rewrite of Title III, I haven't seen it yet. I know Sheriff knows, but I'm expecting it to allow more expenditures in the search and rescue type operations, rather than any of these old projects that we were using Title III money for that are running out. And on number 9, I did change in that number from last year's budget. I budgeted $2.8 million carryover, where this year I think it was $3 million something, 6, I can't remember, I have to look. But anyway, it's a lower number, and so that's been adjusted. But I think all the other revenues that are up there are basically the revenues that are budgeted the year before, unless I knew something different. So Veteran Services, they already did a budget for this year, a supplemental budget, because last year they got a lot more during this year than we budgeted for last year. So that's been recognized in this document here. And recognized solid waste, I believe, has increase in fees, so that revenue is going to go up for next year. So in the ones that I could figure, and you could look and see in that first column in that box to the first column in this box right here. Yes, it's a jerky mouse, that's why I don't like it. So that in the 17-18 budget, I need one of those pointer things.
Apparently it doesn't work on there, from what I hear.
Work on that screen, we tried.
So the 1,000 and 1,000 is the same revenue. The 2709, 2709 is the same revenue. I haven't handed these are just based off of the first budget discussions with department heads that we have every year. We just kind of go through their budget. Where are you this year? what are you projecting for the end of this year? Is there anything you know about next year that you can tell me right now before we actually, on April 6th, hand these budget worksheets out to them to do their final proposed budgets? So mainly these are the same as the year before on the total revenue projections, unless I knew something different, and then I did put those in. On the payroll expenditures, there's notes down below on all of those that are in yellow. And of course, the payroll projections for next year include already negotiated payroll increases or payroll benefit increases. So then the materials and services are the same as they were in this year's budget, except for the one for the sheriff, because it includes vehicles and equipment for the 4 additional officers that Mr. Hitt mentioned when he just introduced this. And then the only other increase that I have is footnote number 8 on the $25,000 of purchasing a vehicle for I believe that's emergency services. You have to go back over that way so I can see what emergency services. So the payroll ones, the footnotes is last year when we did the budget, we cut out an unfilled position in elections. And Renee, when we talked, asked me to put that back in. It's going to be essential for her department to have that other person, especially when she is having the high turnover she's having in her department. In number 2, and I have to look up above, which is county clerk recording, the difference, and I'm just, if you look way over to the right, let's go way over to the right here, JJ all the way. These over under, these little notes are kind of explaining why those are over under more than the 2 from before. So it's a kind of, that over under is, sorry. So like the first one, which is BOC, this year's 2 from general fund is $5,222, taking out of the general fund. And last year it was $4,144. The difference is $1,078, and that has to do probably with the payroll changes that were already negotiated. Unless it has a note on it, it's basically that kind of difference, because everything else is kind of stayed the same. So in the note for the second one, which is clerk elections, that difference of $53,000 is adding that position and the other changes in payroll besides. So the number 3, footnote includes juvenile. There was a larger percentage. Actually, we did that. We're looking at that for this year, a larger percentage of payroll coming out of parks and into juvenile because of different duties that people are doing in juvenile and parks under Director Trust. So we try to square that up with what's actually happening as compared to how things were last year when we did this budget for this year. So there's a little bit of change in that one. Number 4 is that revenue Title III transfer that may be out of funds. Number 5 is payroll adjustment over this year. It's adding in, here's number 5, community development planning. It's adding the senior planner code enforcement officer position that wasn't there in the year before. And that also adds in non-departmental too, because the nuisance part is in there. And number 6 is in last year's budget, County Council had out of what do they call that? Out of class stipend that he's had, and it was included in last year's budget under the solid waste portion that gets costed for his salary. And so now he's back to his regular pay, and so it reduced the amount in solid waste under payroll. And then number 7 is there were several out-of-class positions in the Sheriff's Department that he squared up into this budget. It didn't add an awful lot to the payroll costs. What's really adding is adding those 4 deputies and their vehicle and supplies. Number 8 is the emergency services, is including in their budget next year a capital outlay for a vehicle purchase, although it may be a supplemental budget this year, and if that's the case, we'll take it back out of next year. And then number 10 is bringing the surveyor up to 18 hours per week and adjusting to his agreed on rehire hourly rate. And number 11 is adding a part-time deputy treasurer. And I don't really have a lot to say about that. I think that it was like a 0.25. I believe that in discussions with Mr. Head, our treasurer has a job that can't not be just passed on to anybody. It's a conflict of interest for anybody in my department to do those things. And she cannot leave because she doesn't have anybody that can come in and do portions of her job while she's gone. So she can't take any vacations, she can't be sick, because a lot of her job is a daily work that has to be done. And so if she leaves, there's nobody to do those things. So that's it's almost what she was budgeting for as a inner service by just hiring somebody from another department, but it's proving to be kind of a problem about getting somebody from another department that is trained to do the things that she needs to be done. So the solution is, instead of hiring somebody from another department whenever she needs to leave, is to actually have somebody that's trained specifically in that position so that they can take over for things what she has to do if she's gone. I think that's what we were shooting for on that.
Right, and it would also be an employee shared with another department.
It would be just...
Wouldn't be 25%. It wouldn't be a 25% employee just in the treasurer. It'd be a 1/4 employee treasurer trained, and but working most days in another department, probably support for County Commissioner's Office administration.
So that's this is where I am right now on the proposed budget. It's basically a status quo except for those footnotes below, and it does include in the status quo increases in the payroll from last year's payroll negotiations. So right now I'm sitting at not balancing the general fund balance by $1,069,332.
So does that include SRS funds? It doesn't, does it?
It doesn't, because I have not got a quote of how much the county's got. I'm hearing that we can be getting some kind of communication from Rocky McVeigh within this next week that will actually break down what to expect county by county. When they say 2015, it's hard to look at our books and say, this is the number. The number that was receipted into 2015 for SRS and 2016 for SRS are very different numbers. And I'm believing that the 2015 funding that they're talking about was actually received in 2016. So I would rather hear from Rocky when he says 95% of 2015, he's going to break that out by county and give us a number, and I would rather use that in my budgeting than trying to guess what number to use.
Oh, that makes sense.
So that's why it doesn't include that yet.
Because that could paint a
And
pretty significant picture.
I don't think it's going to paint a significant picture in the general fund, because most of that SRS money is road fund money.
Oh, is it?
And it would help the road fund, but I don't believe there's going to have a huge impact, and I'm talking huge impact on
Commissioner
general
Housley?
fund.
We'll have to wait and see, but that's not what it was the last time. It was, the road fund was significant also, but both were very significant on that last time around. When I say significant,
When I look at the
one
history,
plus million for each year for each of the, and the road fund, well, I think came in at like a couple million or something.
when I look at the history, I'm not seeing in those 2 years a significant amount of money. So I just don't know. I don't want to say anything until I get the amount from Mr. McVeigh, really.
Council Huddle?
Well, I heard a word or a phrase that got my attention. It talked about a conflict of interest. And I think he said there's a conflict of interest between the treasurer and the accountant.
Because a lot of the things that she does is tasks that involve bank accounts, which also involve signers of bank accounts that are in my office. And so that if you have somebody who does something that's a signer on a bank account that does something in the banking, it is something that we do not want to do unless we absolutely have to. It's a small office, and sometimes you have to do things that are not really protocol for separation of duties. But this is one that I think that we can avoid, and I would prefer to avoid it rather than having one of my staff step in and do things that they're signers on the accounts. They have more access than Debbie does to do certain things, and she has more access to do certain things than my person does. So that gives that person a lot of access.
Too much, huh?
Too much, that, in my opinion, yes. It's more a separation of duties than it is a conflict of interest, but yeah, it's just trying to keep that separation of duties so that our risk factor is as low as possible in a small office.
Are there any other questions? No? Okay, good job. Thank you.
Thank you.
That concludes our presentation, Madam Chair, Commissioners, even ahead of time, unless you have any other questions or you'd like to bring up at this time, or suggestions, recommendations for myself or our staff at this time.
Any suggestions? Comments? Okay, then this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.